July 27, 2025, Oslo, Norway. In a quiet hall nestled in the heart of Scandinavia, the Nobel Committee released its shortlist of 5 global peace contenders. But this year, one name reverberated far beyond the chamber walls: Ibrahim Traoré, interim president of Burkina Faso. His presence on that list didn't just surprise the world, it redefined it. Traoré is no ordinary politician. He did not emerge from elite universities or global think tanks. He rose through the grit of lived experience, not campaign slogans. A 36-year-old soldier from a land often overlooked in international affairs, now hailed as the frontrunner for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. What set Traoré apart wasn't controversy, it was clarity of purpose. In an era of polished speeches and empty summits, he chose something older and harder: work, sacrifice, and truth. His revolution began not with tanks, but with tools, with shovels in farmers' hands, with books in children's laps, with medicine in village clinics. His war was against poverty. His battlegrounds were hunger, inequality, and neo-colonial dependence. How does a soldier from one of the world's least developed nations become a symbol of global peace? The answer lies in what he stood for, and what he stood against. Traoré didn't take up arms for conquest or power. He rose to defend his people's right to dignity. He declared gold, land, and water as strategic national assets, no longer to be extracted for foreign profit but to serve the needs of Burkina Faso's citizens. He invested in women-led cooperatives, funded free education zones, and restored millions of hectares of stolen land to the people. Where others preached peace from podiums, he practiced it in policy. This is the first time in Nobel history that a young African leader, who came to power via a military uprising, is recognized not as a threat, but as a visionary. The committee commended Traoré for his moral clarity and his commitment to justice over personal ambition. In Burkina Faso, peace is not brokered through foreign embassies. It is built with local hands, in classrooms, clinics, and community farms. It is rooted in sovereignty, in saying no to debt traps and yes to self-reliance. It is a peace earned, not negotiated. Traoré's journey challenges long-held Western definitions of peace and leadership. His nomination is not just symbolic, it is disruptive. It forces the world to ask, can peace come from those who were never invited to the table? From Ouagadougou's bustling markets to the power corridors of Washington, Paris, and Beijing, this moment has ignited debate. A soldier-turned-statesman from the global south is now a beacon of something much larger than himself, a new era of post-colonial leadership. Since taking office in September 2022, Ibrahim Traoré has turned Burkina Faso into more than just a nation resisting imperialism. He has turned it into a blueprint for justice, resilience, and true independence. Since taking power on September 29, 2022, Ibrahim Traoré has led a transformation that not only shook Burkina Faso, but echoed across the African continent and beyond. His approach defied conventional politics, rooted not in ideology, but in practical sovereignty and peace through self-reliance. One of his most profound and unexpected achievements was the rehabilitation of over 12,000 armed militants, not through airstrikes or prisons, but through a strategy grounded in humanity. Traoré launched nationwide reconciliation programs, offering vocational training, psychological support, and resettlement opportunities. Where others saw enemies, he saw potential. The goal was not to punish, but to reintegrate former fighters as citizens, workers, and fathers, restoring both individual lives and national unity. In another historic step, Traoré returned 3.88 million hectares of farmland, land previously seized by foreign corporations, back into the hands of local farmers. It wasn't just an economic decision, it was a bold declaration: the soil belongs to the people who nourish it, not to distant shareholders. For many, it was the first time in generations that ancestral land was restored, reviving traditional agriculture and local economies. But Traoré's vision didn't stop at national borders. He co-founded the Sahel Life Alliance, a groundbreaking ecological pact between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Their shared mission, to combat desertification and climate collapse through mass reforestation. Together, these nations have planted 800 million trees across the Sahel, not just as an environmental act, but as a symbol of African unity and regeneration. At home, Traoré imposed a level of fiscal discipline that stunned observers. He slashed government spending by 60%, eliminating unnecessary luxuries, and redirecting national funds toward the pillars of progress, education and healthcare. No flashy slogans. Just results. In just 18 months, Burkina Faso witnessed the construction of 2,400 new schools and 700 modern health centers, a pace and scope of development unmatched anywhere else in West Africa. In villages once forgotten, classrooms now echo with the voices of children. In regions once underserved, mothers can now give birth in clean clinics, not on dusty roads. These reforms are not merely statistics. They represent a new model of leadership, one rooted in accountability, sovereignty, and service. Traoré has shown that true power lies not in domination, but in empowering one's people to stand, heal, and rebuild. Recognizing the deep connection between nutrition and learning. Ibrahim Traoré made a bold policy decision that touched millions. 95% of rural primary school children now receive free daily meals, not from imported aid, but from locally grown food. This initiative not only feeds young minds but strengthens local farming, creating a powerful cycle of self-reliance and sustainable development. On May 4, 2025, Traoré took another historic step. He pardoned 1,100 former militants and welcomed them into the Farmers of Peace program, a national initiative that turns former combatants into agricultural workers and land stewards. The United Nations hailed it as a global model for conflict resolution and rural reintegration, emphasizing that peace isn't a ceasefire, it's a dignified second chance. These are not gestures. They are proof of a leadership grounded in reality, not rhetoric, where peace is not declared, but built with hands, with seeds, and with sweat. But Traoré's journey would soon intersect with an even more unexpected voice. On July 1, 2025, during the Feast of All Saints, a message echoed from the heart of the Vatican. Pope Leo XIV, known for his fierce commitment to social justice, paused during his sermon and spoke directly of Traoré. His words were simple, but seismic. "When I pray for peace," he said, "the face of a young soldier from Burkina Faso appears in my mind. He preaches not through law or scripture, but through sweat and soil. He has never walked the corridors of this Vatican. Yet he lives as if the poor of the world are his sanctuary." It was not just poetic praise, it was unprecedented history. This marked the first time in modern Vatican history that a sitting African head of state, especially one who came to power through a military transition, was officially endorsed for the Nobel Peace Prize by the Holy See. The Pope's endorsement didn't just affirm Traoré's leadership, it reframed it. It presented him not merely as a political reformer, but as a moral force, a man leading a spiritual revolution against injustice, poverty, and neglect. For centuries, peace was imagined in marble halls and negotiated through formal accords. But Traoré's rise, now sanctified by Rome, challenged this model. It brought peace down from the podium and into the soil, where it feeds children, repurposes rifles, and restores stolen land. The Vatican's voice broke the silence of indifference. What followed was a global ripple effect, a domino chain of international figures, institutions, and civil societies who began to re-examine what peace truly looks like in the 21st century. Because sometimes, peace is not a treaty. Sometimes, it's a meal in a school, a tree planted in the desert, or a gun laid down for a hoe. World leaders, often divided by ideology and interest, found themselves reluctantly aligned on one unexpected figure, Ibrahim Traoré, a leader whose politics defy traditional labels. Even France, Burkina Faso's former colonial power, responded with a tone of cautious respect. President Anne-Luc Marot, known for her technocratic centrism, stated, "We may not agree with all of Mr. Traoré's methods. But we cannot ignore the results. He is writing a new chapter in Africa's story." With action, not aid. It was a measured but meaningful nod from a country still wrestling with the legacy of empire. Now forced to accept a post-Francophilic reality, where Africa speaks and acts on its own terms. In Washington, the tone was more careful. U.S. Secretary of State Janet R. Collins issued a polished, strategic statement. We respect the nomination and recognize Mr. Traoré's contribution to regional stability in the Sahel. This is an opportunity for the international community to rethink what peace in the 21st century truly means. Beneath the diplomatic language, the message was clear: Traoré's policies challenged the global status quo. His rejection of IMF loans, his ban on foreign mining companies, his push for nationalized food systems, all signal a quiet, yet powerful rebuke of liberal economic orthodoxy. By contrast, Brazil offered no such restraint. President Luis G. Costa, a longtime admirer of anti-colonial movements, spoke with warmth and clarity. I once called him the new Sankara. But he corrected me. He said, I'm just a farmer in uniform. That's when I knew. He deserves the Nobel. Costa's remarks echoed across the global south, forging a symbolic bridge between Latin America's post-colonial struggles and Africa's unfolding renaissance. In Moscow, the Russian president framed Traoré as a realist, not a revolutionary. He is not a builder of ideologies. He is a builder of food systems, schools, and belief. These weren't just soundbites, they reflected a deeper shift in the geopolitical winds. For decades, Africa was a theater of foreign competition, a battleground of outside influence and extraction. Traoré changed the stage entirely. He turned that battleground into farmland, into schools, into infrastructure, into hope. And the world, even those uncomfortable with his defiance, had no choice but to take notice. Night falls over Ouagadougou. But the city refuses to sleep. From the airport highway to Thomas Sankara Square, tens of thousands pour into the streets. Beneath homemade lanterns, they chant a single name. Ibrahim Traoré. Vendors pass through the crowd with steaming cups of bissap and roasted peanuts, as drummers echo rhythms older than the mossy stone statues that line the avenue. It is not a protest. It is not a rally. It is a celebration of possibility, a moment when a generation chooses dignity over dependency, unity over division, and a farmer in uniform over imported saviors. A hand-painted banner, strung between two tall acacia trees, ripples in the evening breeze. It reads: We no longer beg. Now the world comes to us. For many in Burkina Faso, the news of Ibrahim Traoré's Nobel Peace Prize nomination fell like rain after a long drought. Radio stations crackled with emotion, callers shouting, Sacre Victoire. In mud-brick homes, mothers wept, not in sorrow, but in relief. Their children now walk to new neighborhood schools, not past military checkpoints. And at night, they sleep without the echo of gunfire shaking the rooftops. Along the Natanon River, a new kind of soldier works. The land. Former fighters, now wearing blue overalls stamped with "Farmers of Peace." Fire up diesel pumps to irrigate fields of maize. Watering life instead of guarding death. Beyond Burkina Faso, the celebrations spread like wildfire. In Niamey and Bamako, youth collectives projected phone-shot videos of Traoré onto public walls, chanting, One Sahel. One dream. In towns where electricity flickers off at dusk, dance circles spun past midnight. Even in parched villages, drums beat and children laughed beneath a moonlit sky. Because if one of the world's poorest nations can rise, then so can they. Of course, not everyone danced. Elders sat in quiet corners, murmuring concerns. Would this global spotlight invite new forms of pressure, new geopolitical entanglements? But even they could not deny the facts. Terror attacks down. Food harvests up. Clinics running. Children fed. They watched with their own eyes as former rivals planted saplings together, 5 at a time. each tree tagged with the same three words: Liberté, Travail, Dignite, Freedom, Work, Dignity. Then, on July 27, 2025, just one day after the Nobel announcement, a powerful image unfolded in Ouagadougou. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood shoulder to shoulder at a historic press conference. Their expressions were solemn. Their message, unwavering. They declared that Traoré's nomination was not a personal victory, but a continental affirmation. Proof that Africa can rise, not as a recipient of history, but as its author. And they unveiled something extraordinary. A new regional institution, the Joint Civil Command of the Sahel. Unlike military alliances of the past, this command would focus on the peaceful pillars of progress. Food security, education, resettlement, public health, and local media sovereignty. It was a vision not just of unity, but of self-determination, of practical solidarity, of a continent reclaiming its own destiny. At the same time, neighboring nations like Guinea, Chad, and Togo issued official congratulations. But their messages carried something deeper than protocol, a quiet endorsement of Traoré's radical model of self-reliance, regional solidarity, and rejection of foreign debt. Increasingly, African diplomats began to ask, could this be the blueprint for a new African development model, one designed by Africans, for Africans, within the framework of the African Union? The ripple effect reached Addis Ababa, where debate intensified inside AU headquarters. Many delegates urged the Union to revisit its rapid response mechanism, a policy built to isolate governments that came to power through military transitions. But one commissioner, speaking off-record, captured the mood shift. We can no longer judge leaders by how they rise. We must judge them by what they rise to build. In Europe and the United States, official responses remained cautious, tethered to traditional concerns about democratic norms. But behind closed doors, a different tone emerged. Western diplomats began to acknowledge Traoré's growing legitimacy. Some even reopened informal communication with Burkina Faso, a nation that, just months earlier, had cut ties with the IMF and exited several defense arrangements. The Nobel nomination had become far more than an award. It was a symbolic fracture, a crack in the global order where Africa once spoke with borrowed voices. Now, for the first time in generations, the continent was speaking for itself, and the world was finally listening. From the balcony of the presidential palace, Traoré addressed a swelling crowd below. His voice, calm but resolute, carried across the night air. This nomination is not mine alone. It belongs to every mother who fed a child from her own field. To every youth who picked up a shovel instead of a rifle. To every teacher who taught under a tree with no roof. We are building peace, not to impress the world, but to survive it. His words ignited a tidal wave across African campuses. In Bamako, Niamey, Accra, and Kinshasa, students gathered for vigils, forums, and marches. Across social media, the hashtag Nobel for Africa began trending globally. Young Africans posted videos, poems, and protest art, demanding recognition for leaders who work the land, not lecture circuits. In Lagos, a student activist tweeted, "Traoré didn't wear a suit. He wore boots. He didn't go to Davos. He went to the fields. That's why this Nobel matters." In Johannesburg, university students organized an art exhibition titled Fields of Peace. It featured paintings, installations, and spoken-word poetry, all inspired by Traoré's agricultural revolution and the dignity it restored to rural life. Across the Pan-African landscape, solidarity deepened. And what had started as a Nobel nomination became something more. A declaration that Africa was no longer waiting to be saved. Africa was saving itself. In a rare display of unity, Niger, Guinea, and Chad issued a joint statement. If he wins, it is not the victory of one man. It is the vindication of a continent. A farmer president is more powerful than a president in exile. A well-fed village is stronger than a foreign loan. Across African airwaves and media outlets, the moment was declared a turning point. Pan-African journalists called it a slap to the old order, not just to the architecture of global power, but to the narratives that define how Africa is perceived and how Africa sees itself. Now, the world watches as the date draws near. On December 10, 2025, all eyes will turn to Oslo. On that day, a single name may be etched into the long, storied legacy of the Nobel Peace Prize. For millions across Africa, that name already means something profound. Hope, in battered villages and booming cities, now carries a single face. Ibrahim Traoré. At just 36 years old, he represents a new kind of leadership. Untethered from colonial debts. Unshaped by foreign think tanks. And uninterested in applause from abroad. If he is awarded, Traoré would become the first sitting African head of state to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And the first leader ever nominated despite coming to power through a military transition. It would mark the rise of a new global archetype. A practitioner of practical peace. Not drafted in negotiation rooms. But sown into fields. Etched into chalkboards. And breathed into rural clinics. Yet whatever happens in Oslo, one truth is undeniable. The story of Ibrahim Traoré has already changed the conversation. He is not merely a nominee. He is a mirror, reflecting the contradictions of our age. Power without justice. Diplomacy without dignity. Peace without land. He is a reminder that true peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of justice, dignity, and land in the hands of those who till it. As the final decision nears, the world is watching. Not just to see who wins, but to reconsider what peace really means in the 21st century.